change. There we go. There's more people still joining us. Welcome, welcome. So today's webinar is going to be on partnership. On behalf of the North American Sport Movement, I want to welcome you to our webinar today. We are recording it. That was a little bell that you just heard. We're recording it so others can watch it later on as well. And then you'll have the capacity also to come back and discover or revisit this webinar at a later date and dive into the content that we're going to share. The purpose of our webinar is that we do once a month is to kind of introduce some of the content. So we're not here to attempt in our limited time to talk about partnership and every aspect of partnership, but we're just going to touch on a couple of points. I'm real excited today to have Danielle and Tony join us, and in a little while I'm going to have them introduce themselves actually, so that you can kind of get to know them a little bit better. And they have a lot to offer us and sharing their experiences in partnership. And one of the things that we do in these webinars is highlight one of our core values, one of the values that we have as a North American sport movement. And there's content that is behind those values that we would encourage you to go into and to learn, not just from the knowledge that's in that content, but really what that content represents is experiences. Experiences like you're going to hear from Tony and Danielle today, experiences from others who have been partnering around the world. And they've shared those best practices and those principles, and that's what we deliver in that training content. So I really encourage you to visit the North American Sport Movement website, and if you haven't already joined, please join. And if you have access to that content as well as other content that's there to try to serve you as we try to redeem the world of sport and play and fitness around us. So today we're going to be talking about partnership. Let me introduce myself a little bit. My name's Dan Williams. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. And I know a little bit about partnership in the context of the Olympics. I first started in 1993 as a part of a partnership here in Atlanta. It was a representation of a lot of churches, a lot of parachurch ministries, a lot of local businesses, also local government. And we all began to come together and to see what could we do with the Olympics coming. And so there was a lot of different strategies that emerged from that. But then that also introduced me to a lot of other cities that were hosting major sporting events. So I kind of went around the world, if you will, in quite literally, and shared those lessons that we learned here in Atlanta, but also learned new lessons from other cities that were hosting major sporting events. And of course, you probably are watching the Olympics right now, or at least watch some of them on television, and you see what's going on in Tokyo, Japan. And of course, it's been a very different Olympics with all that we're having to go through. But the principles of partnership, regardless of whether we're facing COVID pandemic or any other things, I think the principles you're going to learn from Tony and Danielle today are going to help you. And then I look forward to opening up some of our time to some questions and answers as well. So that's enough about me. I'm just going to kind of facilitate our time together. So let me hand it over to Tony, you first. Why don't you introduce yourself, and then Danielle, after Tony, why don't you introduce yourself? Just share a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, where you are, and then we'll dive into some of the questions that we are going to dive in today. Tony, take it away.
Yeah, my name is Tony. I live in South Florida. My husband and I run Christian Skaters International. So we're a big group of partners and ministry all over the world. So, and we've also run local ministries here in South Florida. We ran a ministry in Texas for a while. And right now we are working with the local homeschool community, teaching classes through skateboarding and surfing. So, so definitely, we've used a lot of partnerships over the years and all of that.
I'm Danielle Thomas. I'm in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Um, I'm trying to think. I'm kind of in transition right now. I worked for SportQuest and traveled with SportQuest for many years between 2006 and 2019, I think. That's the time frame. So I grew up like really learning partnership, I would say, within the sport movement through SportQuest and the partnerships that I saw on the trips and things as I traveled. Now I'm working at LSU, which I have for a number of years as an adjunct instructor in the sociology department, which I love teaching and working on campus. Part of my work teaching is facilitating partnerships in the sense that I'm sending students into the community and connecting them with opportunity to understand how to apply what they're learning through service and connection in the community. And then with SportQuest, when we came to Baton Rouge, what we did is set up really a network of partnerships that I'm still a part of in the Gardeer community. It's a neighborhood in Baton Rouge. And in that neighborhood, I'm between 3 or 4 different organizations constantly. I work closely with an organization called the Gardeer Initiative that does education and support and substance abuse I guess, resistance in some senses in the community. And then Gardeer Youth Alliance is a sports organization. So I'm a coach and helped them start a soccer program in 2015 that I'm still a part of. And then there's a Hispanic church that I partner frequently with for soccer as well. So just kind of in the middle of lots of moving pieces and lots of partners. And have always been that way as kind of the one lady who's out in this neighborhood doing sports. You can't do it by yourself. So as the one person that kind of wanted to initiate some of this, I had to find partners to come along with me.
Wow, so we've already heard just two examples of how partnerships can be very unique and represent maybe different groups that you've never even thought about in the context of partnering in the community. And so, Tony, Danielle, I want to ask you both. We all have experiences in partnering in some way, and oftentimes it can become really complicated very fast. So give me some examples of where patience and love have been tested in your experiences with your partnerships. Maybe explain a little bit a situation where maybe you had to walk through a difficult challenge with somebody or a partner.
You want one of us to jump in?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I was just going to tell kind of a funny story. I was very young when we first brought SportQuest to Louisiana. Now I can look back and be like, wow, that I still feel relatively young, but that was like 10 years ago. So I was like a baby. I was really in over my head. And this lady who is the executive director of the Gardeer Initiative, who I mentioned, I'm kind of coming into her territory in many senses. She is in her 70s. So she's at the time, I guess, 60s, but she's like, who is this white kid that has all these big ideas and wants to work them out in my neighborhood? So initially she was kind of watchful. And then she decided to go ahead and dive in and in some senses probably save me and make sure that I like lived through the experience and wasn't destructive in my attempt to serve the community, because you can be, right? But I was thinking about the frustrating thing that first year was we were doing the project. And if any of you have done SportQuest projects, they can be very big. Like it's 5 days usually in a week, and you have a lot of kids, a lot of people out there. We got overwhelmed. I thought that first year, again, young and inexperienced, I'm thinking 75 kids max. By day 2 or 3, we have 200. So I can't think straight. I'm like, what is going on? I'm not equipped to lead this. And here's Muriel, Dr. Harrison, Muriel. She followed me around every day without fail. She came to the park during the project and she would follow me. And I'm already overwhelmed. And she would just inundate me with questions. Did you think about this? Did you think about this? Did you think about this? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And I was like, oh my gosh. And the big thing that week was trash bags. She badgered me about trash bags, and I did not succeed in bringing large black, like big bin trash bags a single day that week. I was unsuccessful. She would go get them from like her office every day, but she would make sure that I knew that I was supposed to be bringing them. Now that sounds funny, but the reality is we're working in a lower income neighborhood where litter is a major problem. She's developing a partnership with like the Parks and Rec organization with this park that we're using. And if we trash it, a few things happen. One, we set a really bad example for the community. We're not, setting the pace for cleaning the litter. Two, we potentially harm that partnership and that relationship with Parks and Rec because they're coming out going, well, why would I let you do camp again if all you do is leave trash everywhere that we have to pick up? And so the trash bag seems small, but it's a big issue. And for me, it was just a lesson in those kinds of things that seem like not a big deal, but they really can be a big deal in a partnership. Now, Muriel was very patient. She would debrief me every summer, and she would come alongside and partner even when I made big mistakes. And about year 7, probably, we were in the midst of one of those camp days, and she sat in the pavilion the whole camp, and she held babies with like parents that had come and brought their older children. And I was just kind of sitting and hanging out with her because by now things are running much smoothly. And she said, I just love this week every summer because I get to sit here and hold babies and you get to do all of the work. And I said, yeah, but remember year like 1, 2, 3, and 4, this is only possible because you badgered me about trash bags for a while. So those kinds of things, it took a lot of patience, I'm sure, from her standpoint to mentor me into a lot of growth that was going to be necessary. But there's a deep love there as well. And in some senses, a passing of the torch where now there are projects that I'm the leader and she's able to just kind of come and relax and see really the fruit of her labor and her long-term investment in me and in the community.
That's a wonderful story. I love just a summer, what sticks out to me is patience and love takes a little bit of time. And you definitely had the commitment to go through some very difficult experiences in a personal way, but the reward was the community was impacted because you submitted yourself to that. So thank you for sharing, Danielle. That's wonderful. Tony, let me, you can tie your answer to this question into love and patience and maybe an example, but let me go a little bit deeper now. So we kind of heard a little bit in Danielle's experience, consensus building. And, building consensus doesn't always mean that I get to win the argument. Sometimes, we can kind of bring a perspective or a view into something that we feel very strongly about, but consensus often means that sometimes we have to move a little bit on maybe some of those strong feelings we have. Can you maybe give us an experience in your context and in your partnership journey where that was evident?
Yeah, I think especially working with a skate park and skateboarders, they usually have a bad reputation, and we're on a church property. And I remember when we first moved on the church property, we had a lot of the church parents saying we can only have saved Christians at the park skateboarding, and we were more of an outreach, and our heart was really to reach that community. So it was always a challenge partnering with the church and getting them to understand our mission and why we were there. And then also balancing the partnership with people outside of the church, having them involved, making them feel like they were part of the family and we wanted them there without kind of beating them over the head with the Bible. So kind of, being able to share Christ with them and how we served our community and our local community. So that was always a delicate balance with us over the years. And we couldn't do what we did as a ministry without those partnerships. We had zero budget. Skate ministry is usually not the first thing churches pour into as far as financially. So everything we did from building things to feeding the kids to everything involved community partnerships. And they weren't always Christians that we partnered with. And over the years, we've been doing this a really long time now. We started back in 2003, so long time ago. Everything we did was based on partnerships. And because of that, we have some great relationships over the years.
That's, that's an incredible, picture, I think, that we need to just take a moment and pause. And I'm guessing that many of the people who are joining us on our call today and those who will be watching this at a later date may be going through similar situations where there's some real strong differences and maybe even worldviews between those that we're partnering with or those that we're reaching through maybe a partnership. So the people in the partnership maybe even view the people we're serving from different perspectives, and so building consensus and moving forward. Give me maybe some examples, Danielle, from your experience where you had to overcome some things. So maybe even paint for us a picture of the diversity and the challenges with the diversity in your partnership when it came to actually moving forward in a way that was productive or impactful in the community. And how did you overcome those challenges?
This is kind of a hard story actually from the ministry and the partnership, but I think it's relevant to this question of just kind of consensus building and working through some conflicts and working in a diverse setting. The neighborhood I'm in is a very low income neighborhood, and a lot of the partners I'm working with are, they're more local than me. I'm an outsider in comparison. But there's this mindset of like a scarcity mindset or a scarcity of resources. So it's kind of like I get what's mine and I'm not going to share it or be like very open with it because I don't know how long it's going to last. And I don't know where more will come from. And you can see experiences lead to this kind of mindset. So, I mean, it's built because they've had bad experiences. But when you're trying to partner, you need kind of an open flow of resources. And then it can also be very territorial. For me, I'm always coming in like, hey, gospel, like, let's just work together and do what we do. But, you can step on toes because people are going, well, this is like the street that I work on and this is how we do it here. And you're like, oh, okay. Or, why would you start this program? Like I started a sports like summer program when there was already an organization that was doing teams and things. So you have to work around this idea of like, I'm not competing with you. We can run together. We don't have to run or strive against one another. I think of Bob and the way he and like his work kind of Bob Schindler like redefines competition. So I've had to work with that kind of stuff. And one time, I was pretty young still, just a couple years in. One of the ministries we were partnering with, the sports ministry, he wanted to hire me to do some communications and behind the scenes work for his organization that does the teams and stuff in the neighborhood. And he agreed to pay me, not a lot, but like $100 every couple of weeks or something for me to do this kind of communication type stuff that frankly, he didn't have the education to do. The gentleman in charge is actually illiterate. And so he was kind of like, can you be me on email sometimes? And can I pay you to do that so that I don't have to freak out about emails? I'm like, sure, not a problem. And I was also in process of founding that soccer side of his organization with him. Well, one of his employees, I wouldn't even say employees, but she had co-founded the organization with him and was kind of co-leading it. She got really jealous when she heard he was paying me. Again, that idea of resource scarcity, right? Well, if you're going to pay her, are you going to pay me? Are you going to pay them? Who are you going to pay? How much are they going to make? And it created all these questions, which was unexpected to me. Now I can predict things like that. Then I'm just like, I'm a grad student. I make like no money, this isn't that much money anyway. Why is this such a big deal? But she went behind my back and told him that she had heard that I was trying to take the organization over for him and getting him to hire me was like a first step. And so it created this massive blow up. He came to me in the park in front of a lot of people and he yelled at me. And I didn't know how to handle that kind of face-to-face, again, culturally, right? This like face-to-face conflict. I'm like, what is going on? He's 6'4". He's like standing over me. I cried. My blood pressure spiked so bad that my nose bled and I like left. And, that really could have been the end of it. Like, I'm never going back into that neighborhood again, But I love that gentleman. Even through that, I was like, I don't understand what just happened, but I want this to work. And so we had a mediated conversation, and that's the right step to take. Now, I didn't fix everything, and it didn't work really, in the sense that it wasn't like a big hug fest at the end of the mediated conversation. It was still hard. And he was having me do all this work for the soccer program at the time, which was just starting. And so we had another conversation after the mediated conversation, kind of baby steps toward consensus. And I just said, listen, I like your program and your work, and I don't want to be you. Like, I want to work with you to make your program successful. But I think to do that, I cannot be your employee. Like, I see it created some jealousy and some issues, and the money is not that important to me if it's going to be the root of this kind of conflict. I also feel like because I was getting paid, that there was some like leadership authority type stuff happening that was making my work harder. So I will be a free agent and work autonomously and will not work for you, but I will work with you. And the soccer program will be yours. It's under your organization, and it will stay that way. And you get the credit, and your organization gets the numbers and the growth. But we're all going to work together to use this program for the gospel. So that was kind of the consensus. And now 6 years later, I still administrate the soccer program. He's very hands off with it. It operates well the way it goes. It's still under his umbrella. I have never taken another dime from the organization, and it's good. You know, the program has been good. Now, again, we're friends, and we work together on other projects as well. So we were able to move through the interpersonal side of that over time. That just took me really letting go of the offense of the false accusation. But those kinds of things, ministry in a diverse setting can be filled with conflict and strife and things like that.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's a difficult story for you, Danielle, but it's a powerful story about really the ability that a partnership has is you can only move at the speed of trust. And if there's no trust, you don't move very fast. So Tony, maybe in your experience with what you're doing, you shared, some challenge there, a very distinct, polarized view of what your outcomes were in the context of a church saying we only want Christians here versus your kind of vision to reach people who were not Christians, and how do we leverage this skate part? Now, you mentioned earlier working with home schools. So you have a very unique unique context that's happening there in South Florida. Maybe share a little bit about your experiences in building trust with the kinds of partners that you've been connecting with and working with as you move forward with your ministry there.
Well, yeah, I think we learned really early on, like Danielle did, that we wanted to be a complement to somebody instead of a competition thing. So instead of reinventing the wheel, who was already doing something and doing it well, and how could we complement one another? And I think that was also some of our frustrations in the ministry. People would come in and say, hey, we love what you're doing. And instead of saying, we love what you're doing and we want to partner with you and help you, we love what you're doing, we want to do the same exact thing right next door. And so that was always a huge frustration to us because we needed help. I mean, I was on a call earlier today, and there are 180 million people who do action sports around the world. And in our sports ministry network, we only have 400 or so workers. So we need help with more than, competition. And I think it was Eddie Waxer who talked about, do we go into a place and colonize it, or do we go there to equip the local people? And so I think we learned that very early on. And so when it came to, hey, do we come to a place and do a skate contest and share the gospel when there's already people doing skate contests? Or do we come and serve the community, be there, be extra hands and feet that they need, and then have those good conversations with people that we're able to share the gospel one-on-one. And that always works so much better with us. So now with our homeschool program and what we're doing, we're able to partner with the community, with different companies that come in that want to possibly raise up people in their fields, or we work with different nonprofits that come in and teach the kids. And it's been a great community relationship. And I'd say about 80% of the people we work with aren't Christian-based ministries or nonprofits or businesses, but we always have these open doors to have these great conversations. And so that over the years has been so much of a deeper kind of impact in our community than going out and doing these big evangelical events like we used to do way back when we were just starting.
That's wonderful. That's great insight that both Danielle and Tony have shared with us. You may have questions from your own perspective of where you are in your own partnership journey. So let me just open it up. If you have a question, you can either type it in the chat box and we'll read it out for us. Or if you want to just, I think there is a function to raise your hand, but I'm not sure how that works. There's not enough on the call. I don't think that we should have a problem. So if you want to ask a question, just either wave or ask it. And I know that Danielle or Tony would love to speak into it. Looks like we have quite a few people from outside of North America as well that are joining us. Wonderful. Thank you.
We can't hear you.
Yeah, Angie.
Yeah, sorry, Angie.
There we go. Still can't hear you.
Angie, you can type in the chat as well, if that helps, if your microphone's not working.
Still can't hear you, girl.
Well, while Angie's maybe typing in the chat, I have a question, and I'll maybe direct this towards Tony. I know Danielle could answer this one too. But when you are working, partnering with a lot of non-Christian organizations, companies, I'm just wondering for all of us who are listening, how we could learn from your experience there, because we know your heart would be to be able to share the gospel, to be a witness for Christ. Are there things that you maybe that kind of help you filter some of the decisions about who you will and won't partner with, or ways that you're more creative in sharing the gospel when you're partnering with someone that may not share that same worldview?
Well, I think we have a benefit in the name of our ministry is called Christian Skaters, so they know when they're partnering with us who they're getting, kind of thing. But I think it's also, I mean, a lot of the people we partner with have a similar passion. They love the skateboarding community. They love the kids in the community. And we always say everything has to be family friendly. That's our big key term for them. So the music, family friendly, if you're going to be emceeing a contest, you got to keep it family friendly. So we have a couple of rules that they know that we don't waver on. But I think that, for us, it's been the consistency over the years of saying, hey, you might not agree with us and what we believe, but we love you as our community, and we want to serve you. And that's been a constant, and it's neat to see people come back over the years and say, wow, you've really made an impact. You were always there helping us and always part of it, So especially now with skateboarding being in the Olympics, and there's a big boom in people doing skate lessons and contests and all kinds of different businesses. It's neat to have people come to us and say, hey, you've never asked us really for anything. You're always there serving. And so even though people have donated, hey, pizza or t-shirts or whatever, we always make it a point with how can we also contribute to them and give back to them. So they don't see it as us taking stuff. They see it more as us giving them some ownership to what we're doing. And so that's been really great for us. And it's given us a lot of respect in the community, I guess.
Great. Thanks, Tony.
Angie.
Can I have a question?
Yes.
I'm Severin from Cameroon, Central Africa. I think this is the third or the fourth time that I'm coming online with the North American sport movement. And it's really a joy for me to be with you each time that I connect myself through Zoom with you. And I believe that everybody is good with the COVID and the family and the ministry. Yes, I'm running a sport ministry here in Cameroon, in the English side of Cameroon, because I'm a French speaking, but I live in the English side of Cameroon. And I'm working on a project about the African Nation Cup. It's a major event in Africa. And I want to know, or I want to have your own idea, or even after to coach me, because I don't know how I can link with people that can really partner with me during this African Nation Cup with my organization to serve the sport people. Because on the project, we want to make a soccer tour in the 5 host cities of the nation. And we want to play soccer with teams, share the love of God, and share Bible, share balls, and in the morning do some soccer clinic and some sport time with children. But now I need to know the step how to enter into partnership with some organization that can really help us, maybe with Bibles, with balls, with jerseys, so that we can really, during this time, reach out to the community in the whole nation, because this is an opportunity that we have. We have been waiting for more than 18 years, and now this is opportunities that we have for it. So I want to ask, from your own experience, how can I start about it to establish a partnership with some other people, individuals or organizations, or out of Cameroon or in Cameroon? Thank you very much.
That's a wonderful question. Thank you so much for sharing. I think that's a similar question that most people have when they're first starting out with a partnership. They see a great opportunity. So as you both entered into your communities, what would be your words of wisdom?
So, yeah, for us, we always we would kind of draw a map of our community and think, who's a great cook in our community that could maybe provide food during the events. Who's somebody that's a great coach, a soccer coach that might be willing to get involved. So we draw these little bubbles with all these different assets that we have in our community already. And then I would say to not be scared to think big too, and to ask big of people. And you never know. I always say the worst anybody can say is no, they can't help. So, I mean, reach out to a big company like Nike and say, hey, I'm in Cameroon and I want to do a soccer tournament. Can you send us some soccer balls? Or reach out to your local Bible society and ask if they're able to donate some Bibles. It doesn't hurt, and the worst they can do is say no. So
that's a really powerful strategy that you just touched on, which was asset mapping. And the whole concept of asset mapping is you're not asking people to do what they're not equipped to do. You're asking them to do what they're already equipped to do. So if they're a soccer coach, you ask them to coach soccer, not basketball. If they're a cook, you ask them to cook. Those are great examples, Tony. So Danielle, as you entered into your community, when you're starting out and you're trying to build this partnership, how do you move? How do you find momentum? Because it's so hard to create momentum to get to where you have this vision for that God's given you. We can't hear you. Yeah.
There we go. I was mentored well in this process. There's a gentleman named Clayton Hayes in Baton Rouge. He runs a ministry called Connections, and literally his job is to connect people who have common goals. so they can work together. So he, me being so young, he actually set up multiple meetings for me and took me like person to person or business to business, and would sit down at the table with me and be like, Danielle, and just open the door for me to share my heart and share what I wanted to do and how that person or that company or whatever it may be could help. So Severin, what I was thinking is, I don't know if you're well connected in all of these cities, but I would think of it almost as layers. You're going to be looking for at least one or more church partners in each city, I believe. You're also looking for, I would say that's the middle ground, honestly, I think the church. Above that, I would say businesses. Potentially, it could be a Nike, but it could also just be a local business that has good roots in that community. And at the bottom, so I would kind of stack it from business to church. Maybe some of those business people are, in the church and they're connected. People of peace also. You're going to be looking for people within that church, like individual people that have different gifts or can, bring certain resources to the table. And sometimes I would say, it'll be a person completely outside of the church. It'll be a church that's very passionate about maybe the neighborhood where the soccer field is, where the tournament's going to be. And then maybe a couple of business people that say, hey, I like what you're doing and I'd like to put my company's name on 10 or 15 or 20 soccer balls and give them to you. And you can use them and they have my company's name on them. So I get some publicity and you get your balls. So it's been those kinds of things. And so I found in terms of momentum, Dan, I think it was starting small and finding a few connections. I've been blessed with 2 or 3 churches that have really come alongside of me for the entire way. And I can't attend 2 or 3 churches. So, these aren't always churches I'm attending, but they're churches that are committed to this particular community and people. And so because of what I'm doing, they want to link up with me. And then within those churches, I found people of peace and people that want to serve in the ways that I can open doors for them to. Like you mentioned food, yeah, sure. I have this lady named Wendy who's great at organizing things. And all she did for like the 8 to 10 year run of Sport Quest in Baton Rouge was the food calendar, because I sucked at it. And the first year we ate terribly because I was in charge of finding the volunteers to give food, and it was bad. We didn't have all the holes filled and the project started. After that, Wendy took over, and because of her organizing ability, because of her relationships, she brought that to the table. I had this gentleman named Kirk Lowry. He's a big business guy. He's an engineer. He wanted nothing really to do with the details of the program, but when I pitched it to him and said, this is what we're doing, he said, great, put me down for like a few $100s. And like, my guys like to cook with their grills. Do you have a cookout? And I'm like, we do, the last day. And he's like, great, we'll just show up and grill, but we'll bring all the meat and everything. I said, okay. So for the first 5 or 6 years, I didn't really have any contact with Kirk, except a couple weeks before the project, I would touch base and say, are y'all still in? And he'd say, yeah, what's the day? And then they would bring all of the food, and they would be in charge of getting the donations or buying the meat. And then they would drive their grills to the park, and all they wanted to do was cook and leave. It was great. I didn't have to cook. I didn't have to raise those donations. So I think the long-term momentum of just working with the same partners over time, not asking them for stuff outside of their ability to give, but not being afraid to ask big either. For me, it seemed insurmountable to think about feeding like 200 kids and any other random people that would come into the park. Because I told him, I'm like, it could be 400 to 500 people. He's like, oh, that's fine. That's fine. How many hot dogs is that? And how many hamburgers? You want sausage? And I was always just like, what? Like, he's so well resourced, though. It was a big ask for me, was small for him. It was easy for him to handle. And so I would just say, think of the layers of the different levels of partners that you're searching for in each of those cities that you want to host part of the cup in. And then identifying those key players and those people of peace. Like Wendy is a person of peace. The project doesn't happen without Wendy. And walk with them over time. This might be the first time you do this, but hopefully you would be able to do it multiple years by continuing to grow in those partnerships.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think there's a lot of wisdom in what you shared, Danielle. And And I think, some of the things that stand out to me are, not every partner is equal in the sense that not everybody gives the same way. It doesn't mean they're less important. And sometimes we've been talking about the mission and the gospel. Well, there's some that will be all on board with that, and there's others that just want their community to look better. So they can bring a lot of energy into the gospel story, but they don't really understand the gospel story the same way as some of your other partners do. So you have to really think about, how do you engage your partners? You may have to engage them in different ways as you go through that process. So that's wonderful wisdom. We have time for maybe one or two more questions. I see somebody up there with a hand. That's Baba. And then Angie, you've been trying to talk. We still can't hear you, I don't think. We sorted that out? No? Is there a way that you can type it into the chat box?
Yeah, let me read her question, Dan. It says, for both ladies, when you are dealing with conflict, how have you worked through that internally, because the work is so personal? Any tips to provide?
Pray, a lot of prayer. And then I think to remembering, even though it's something that that you're passionate about, and it's close to your heart, remembering that sometimes partnering isn't about you and what you need, and sometimes it's about what the other person might need through it as well. So just really trusting God and how he's going to use that partnership and even the difficult times, because I really think our God doesn't let anything go to waste. He's a God of economy, and he uses everything. So even in those tough times, just pray through it, breathe and just remember what it's really about in the long run.
I would second that. I would also add, I think for me, I had to develop thicker skin. I tend to take things very personally. So you've criticized the project, and now I think you think, what I heard was, Danielle, you are a terrible leader and a terrible person. And I had several good friend and mentor type people that after those summer projects would sit me down and just tell me what I did bad. So I had to really learn, like, this is love, first of all, that this person has taken time to sit with me, and they took time. If they've got feedback, that means they were present, and they took time out of their day to be present during that project. And then instead of just like talking behind my back or, taking the feedback elsewhere, they said, I want to give that to her because I think she has potential. And I think the project has potential. I also believe in the purpose behind it. And so those people were some of my best people long-term, because they really made me and made the project much better. But I had to separate like my identity as a person from, the work and from the feedback that I was getting. And because I learned how to take feedback so well, the project became a lot better over time, and I grew in leadership. And people who did the project with me would agree, because they would say the first couple of years, Danielle did not have her stuff together. It got better, but it got better because of those hard conversations.
That's really well said. Thank you so much for just sharing, both of you, from your personal experiences. And I just want to encourage us as we think about partnership. We are uniquely positioned. In fact, I believe that God's called us to step into our community through partnership because we know how to do it. And it's not, and the reason is, because it's not easy. It's going to require humility. And where do we learn about humility but in God's word? It's going to require creativity. Where do we learn about creativity but in God's word? It's going to require wisdom. And we're told in God's word that he's the source of our wisdom. And the reality is we have those answers to those difficult, challenging, interpersonal issues, because sometimes with partnership, we're so focused on the people we're trying to impact through the partnership that we forget about the people that we're in relationship with through that partnership. Could be the most impactful audience that we have individually. So whatever it is what we're trying to accomplish through the end goal or the outcome of what we're doing, we can't forget that the people we're on that journey with could be our mission field for those of us who are in that leadership role. And so I would just encourage you in that way. And that's why we have these resources available. The reason is because we need tools. We need the process, the systems, and we've captured those principles of partnership in the training material. And I would really encourage you to go through that, because it's a guide to what really God has to say about partnership. It's a guide that's based on real world experience of people actually doing it and learning these different principles that they've seen in God's word as they've tested them. And that's what's in the training material. And so I'd really encourage you that you go into that content and really go through the content and begin to practice it in your own context. And I'll just leave you with one final thought that Tony mentioned and Danielle mentioned, and it was the word prayer. I can't tell you how, if I was to summarize one thing of all the years of partnership that I've been involved in around the world since 1993, if there was one thing that I could tell you, and if it was only one, it would be consistent in prayer. Prayer is not something you do when the wheels are falling off your partnership, and that's the only time you pray. Prayer is not something you do only when there's crisis. You need to have a consistent method, a consistent rhythm, a consistency to your prayer in whatever partnership you are taking on. Because ultimately that partnership isn't yours. Ultimately it's God's vision that he's placed on your heart. And so you have got to be consistent in your prayer. And so I would just encourage you with that final word. And thank you for joining our call today. Thank you so much, Danielle, for sharing your experience and being vulnerable. Tony, thank you so much for sharing your experience and being vulnerable. I think it encouraged those who are on this webinar, and I'm certain it's going to encourage those who will be watching this webinar. So thank you very much on behalf of the North American Sport Movement.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.